Welcome back to the Marvel Podcast for gifted listeners. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about which hero came first and how some of the heroes and villains of the big two companies of Marvel and DC compare. Now on this episode, we're going to be diving into the mystical realm of Marvel Comics. You've seen Doctor Strange, Wanda, and Agatha use magic in the MCU, but in the comics there are so many more magic users and different types of magic. In the Spider-Verse event, the Master Weaver had told Peter that all magic derives from spider magic, and that's why when Doctor Strange does his incantations, that we can see him having a similar finger pose to when Peter shoots webs. But doing this research, I did not find that to be true. But let's look into the mystics of Marvel, those who are inherent magic users, such as some mutants, whose mutant X gene allows them easier access to the mystic arts. Or we'll look at people like sorcerers, who have to study, and everyone in between. In Marvel, Agamotto, who was an ancient and powerful magic user, discovered that there were 4 main types of magic in Marvel. And then there are some that fall outside of those 4 main types. In this episode, each phase is going to dive into one of the 4 derivatives of magic and look at some of the abilities that fall under those umbrellas of each type. And then the 5th phase, we'll just look at the outliers. So, without further ado, now let's get into phase 1 and look at egocentric magic. The first form of magic is known as egocentric magic. This is magic that draws from one's own power by tapping into one's own spiritual energy. The effects of egocentric magic are psychic in nature, but it taps into spiritual energy, not psychic or mental energies. This form of magic allows users to use astral projection, hypnosis, mind control, and telepathy. And now let's break down what each of those 5 forms of magic do and what they mean. So first let's look at astral projection. This is the ability to have an out-of-body experience and have your form or your being travel in the astral plane. We have seen astral projection in live action in a handful of movies. Firstly, we saw in Doctor Strange, when the Ancient One pushed Stephen's form out of his body. And then later in the movie, when Stephen used his astral projection to help Christine save the Ancient One. We saw it come back again in Avengers Endgame, when the Ancient One pushed Bruce out of his Hulk form. And the most recent movie we've seen it in is Spider-Man No Way Home, where Stephen pushes Peter out of his body. And interestingly, we got to see Peter's spider sense still work, even though his astral form was removed from his physical form. Most users of astral projection are either magic users, such as Doctor Strange or the Ancient One, or the Scarlet Witch, but some telepaths can also harness this ability, such as Professor Xavier, Jean Grey, Emma Frost, and the Shadow King. One mutant that does not fall into either of these categories, that is trance. Her ability is to project herself in astral form, which is, again, usually something reserved for telepaths and magic users. But trance is not a telepath. The next ability that falls under egocentric magic is hypnosis. Hypnosis is not as attached to magic as astral projection is, but it does derive from egocentric magic. And hypnosis can be replicated through pheromones and technology, as well as telepaths being able to harness this ability. So yes, it is a magic ability, but it's not one that you need to be a magic user to be able to harness. Next we have mind control, which is related to hypnosis, in which you can control one's actions. This is similar where people will use hypnosis to achieve mind control, And again, it can be achieved by using technology and pheromones, and telepaths and magic users can harness this ability. The last big form of egocentric magic is telepathy. Much like other egocentric magics, this ability can also be used by telepaths to read minds. It is also how the other egocentric magics are derived from. Telepathy is the path to mind control, hypnosis, and astral projection. Telepathy, much like the other egocentric magic, is the ability to read minds, and is used by telepaths and other magic users. It is also how the other egocentric magics are derived from. Telepathy is the path to mind control, hypnosis, and astral projection. The first magical object imbued with magic by the sorcerer Agamotto, who I had mentioned in the intro was the one who kind of discovered these forms of magic, was the Amulet of Agamotto, and that is powered by egocentric magic. Now that we have covered egocentric magic, let's move on to phase 2 and look at ecocentric magic. Ecocentric magic allows the sorcerer to connect their own life force to the ambient mystical energies of the surrounding environment and manipulate them. On Earth, magic flows through ley lines, or langmei, which are dragon paths. Two intersections of the ley lines can cause magical energy to be greater. Some places that these intersections can happen are churches and temples. And if there is not a church or temple already set up, ecocentric users can make their own kind of temple where these paths intersect to increase their magical powers. One big place in the world that is teeming with magical energy is Stonehenge. Using ecocentric magic, magic users are able to conjure bolts of bedevilment, which are energy beams that either banish or disintegrate whoever is the target. Using ecocentric magic, users can also conjure force fields and illusions. This type of magic can also harness the power of the 4 basic elements: water, earth, fire, and air, as well as conjure small, unstable items. There are 3 other types of magic that fall under ecocentric magic. The first is catastrophe magic, which draws its power from syzygy, which is when the planets align. During these events, syzygy mages can tap into the power of the planets. Doctor Strange was actually able to repower himself after one of these events. This is categorized under ecocentric because it draws power from the environment. Druidic magic is another form of ecocentric magic that is used specifically by druids. Even though they are magic users, druids or druid priestesses do not like being called wizards or mages. The source of druidic magic is unknown. They do worship Celtic gods, but it has never been explicitly said that this is where they draw their power from. They do perform magic that involves the actual earth, and that is why it is listed under ecocentric magic. When it comes to druids, there was originally 3 colors of druids: black, red, and yellow. Black druids lived in Zar and practiced dark forces. Red druids, there wasn't much about them, but they can enter the Scarlet Tower. And yellow druids serve Yamath, the fire god. The third type of magic under the ecocentric bubble is weaver magic. Mages that use weaver magic is very interesting because they don't draw their magic from the earth or from within themselves, but weaver mages tap into the ambient energies of other individuals. They look at the threads of other individuals, and when they touch these threads of an individual, they can see their whole lives and memories, as well as manipulating their energy lines and weaving their destinies. The weaver mages also fashioned binding and crafting illusions and weaving enchantments into items, especially cloth. Most of the enchanted garments existing on Earth were allegedly woven by Weaver mages. Examples include the Cape of Mercury, the Cloak of Levitation, which is Doctor Strange's cloak, the Shadow Cloaks, and the Pink Mink. The Orb of Agamotto is also powered by ecocentric magic. And now that we're about halfway, let's break for a quick ad. This episode is brought to you by Strange Academy. Have you found yourself with new magical abilities and don't know how to control them? Well, then enroll at Strange Academy. We will help you harness those powers and use them properly, even if your parents do rule over a dark dimension. All are welcome at Strange Academy. Apply now. Thank you to Strange Academy for the sponsor. And now, let's move on to Phase 3 with exocentric magic. Exocentric magic draws its power from the forces of other dimensions. They communicate and appeal for assistance to powerful beings that inhabit these other dimensions. These beings are known as mystic principalities, or just principalities. These higher beings that magic users call upon to use their powers are similar to how warlocks call on their patrons in Dungeons & Dragons. An example we actually saw in the MCU was when Caecilius used Dormammu as a principality to draw on his power from the dark dimension, which is kind of like the whole plot of the movie. One way that exocentric mages are able to use their powers is they have to have complex incantations to call upon their principalities, or subtle gestures that they need to be able to perform almost perfectly. The weaker the magic user and the stronger the principality, the more complex the ritual has to be for them to call on their power. So, the bigger the power gap between the principality and the magic user, the harder it is for the magic user to call upon the powers of that principality. Since this magic relies on the power of principalities, it can fail if the principality refuses to help. So, basically, if a magic user calls upon their principality, but the principality is like, nah, then I guess they don't got the power. But, for the most part, principalities do help because the mere act of being asked for help gives the principalities power. So, some of them even encourage mages to invoke their names to get more power. The stronger the magic user, the stronger the principality's power grows from working with the magic user. Not all principalities are friendly, though. Some are malevolent, and they may ask for your soul in exchange for their powers. And some principalities do make long-term deals with magic users that basically always give them access to the power, and so that they don't have to ask every time. And they would also not need to use pre-existing words or gestures. One way that exocentric magic users can increase the power that they draw from principalities is by casting spells in temples or places that are important to the principalities. And if they aren't near one of these places, they can construct one. Kind of like just, constructing an altar to a god. They would construct an altar to their principalities. Some specific examples of exocentric magic are as follows. Voodoo magic falls under exocentric because they pull their powers from the god Vodou. To access the voodoo powers from the god Vodou, they must become a Hogun or a voodoo priest. The Hogun can only be trained by another Hogun, and if they lose their powers, they become Gangans, which are Haugens without power. There are also false gods who try to trick voodoo priests, and they're known as Zobops. Some of the powers that Haugens have are mind control, communication with the god Vodou, fire immunity, and they can create Wanga, which are wooden dolls created to control someone. Basically what you would think of if you ever think of a voodoo doll. Divination and reanimation are also forms of voodoo magic, and voodoo magic is also related to zombies, which we will talk more about in Phase 4. A special type of magic that is under the umbrella of exocentric is Winding Way. An exocentric magic user who accesses the Winding Way can access power so powerful it can even take down the Sorcerer Supreme. A magic user who's pulling power from the Winding Way was able to fully recreate Dante's Inferno. But pulling magic from the Winding Way can go horribly wrong. And it could leave a magic user so powerless that they can't even read tea leaves, which I feel is just a basic thing magic users can do, and if you can't even do that, well, you know. And the last form of exocentric magic is witchcraft. Witchcraft is used by witches and warlocks. This type of magic was created by the goddess of witchcraft, who resides in the Witch's Road, which, in Marvel Comics, the Witch's Road is real. It's not just something created by Wanda's child. If anything, the Witch's Road in Agatha All Along, I would say, is closer to the Winding Way, in terms of, like, what it's rumored to be. And since witches draw their power from the goddess of witchcraft, that is why it is considered exocentric. If the goddess of witchcraft dies, then any practitioners of witchcraft can be rendered powerless. Witchcraft is not inherently good or evil. Some witchcraft users, such as Wanda, are considered white witches, who they take self-accountability, and when they use witchcraft, they will take a toll on their souls. While evil practitioners, they won't pay the price, and everyone around them will pay the price. Witches who use this kind of magic are usually the ones who got their power at birth, which means they are born with witchcraft and have the ability to control it. Also, it is shown that witchcraft can be passed down from generation to generation. The best example of this is Natalia Maximoff and Wanda Maximoff. Natalia was the Scarlet Witch before Wanda, and Natalia's father was the Scarlet Warlock before her. Even Storm, who has been called a Weather Witch on occasion, has called upon her ancestors for power. Yes, she is a mutant, but when she calls upon her ancestors, her powers are stronger. So now let's move into Phase 4, where we will talk about the darkest form of magic in Marvel, and that is known as necromancy. Ego, echo, and exocentric magics are generally known as light or good magic, and necromancy is black magic. It is also referred to as the forbidden path, the dark path, or the scarlet path. Kuthon is the creator of such dark magic. Kuthon created necromancy to oppose his brother Set. Set was seen as the first murderer in the universe, after he figured out you can kill other elder gods to gain their power. Kuthon would go on to use the dark magic that he learned to harness to do experiments on living beings, and doing so, he had created a bunch of new species that would eventually would eventually walk the earth. And these species are as follows. The Nagari are demon-like creatures that were created. The Ape Lords, which are exactly how they sound, apes with human-like characteristics. Man-bats, which are large humanoid creatures with large bat wings. Harpies, humanoid bird creatures, who are usually represented as female. Goblins. Night Gaunts, which are demon-like beasts with sharp teeth, wings, and talons. They were created by H.P. Lovecraft and adopted for Marvel Comics in certain stories. And the final creature Kuthon created were the Wolfmen, who would be distant relatives to the modern-day werewolves. These were probably the most infamous of Kuthon's creations. Most of these races were the ones who ruled the Earth before humans had arrived. Kuthon would record all of these dark spells in the Darkhold. The original Darkhold was transcribed on flesh. Then it would be transcribed on stone, and then eventually onto parchment. The parchment would then be bound and create what is now known as the Darkhold. The Darkhold would also serve as the basis for books such as the Necronomicon, which would also hold dark spells. The Darkhold was left on Earth as a way for Kuthon to have a conduit to the Earth realm and continue his influence on Earth. Currently, in comics, the Darkhold is actually fused with the Scarlet Witch. Necromancy draws power from potent energy generated by the termination of life, for example, human sacrifice. It is able to provide quick and powerful effects, but due to its cost, necromancy is forbidden in most mystic communities, and is only used by some twisted mages greedy for power regardless of the cost. Some spells from the Darkhold were used to create some of the monsters of the world. 20,000 years ago, Varney, who was an Atlantean, would use the power of the Darkhold to make himself the world's first vampire, and he would become Lord of all vampires until he would pass his title on to Dracula, who would then become the new Lord of Vampires. In the 17th century, Sagbada, who was a god of voodoo, used a spell from the Darkhold to create the first zombie after he was asked to create an unbeatable servant. And zombies, there's so much more about them in Marvel that we will dedicate a future episode to just zombies in the Marvel Universe. And as mentioned earlier, Kuthon had created Wolfmen, and the power was recorded in the Darkhold, and that would lead to the descendants who would be werewolves. And so those are the 4 main types of magic in the Marvel Universe, and how they're broken down into each ability of those forms. And now let's go on to the last phase and look at magic outside of these 4. First, there's Atlantean magic. This magic is exclusive to Atlantean sorcerers, and is rumored to have been used to give Atlanteans the ability to breathe underwater. Next up is blood magic, which is magic drawn from the user's own blood. Nico Minoru, who is a member of the Runaways, and who we've recently seen in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, can only summon her Staff of One if she is bleeding. Menstrual blood can be used for this ritual if need be. And if a vampire is a magic user, they are more than likely practicing blood magic. Chaos magic is the magic used by the Scarlet Witch. It at one point was believed to be just a myth, but Wanda Maximoff and her ancestors proved this to be false. Chaos magic can change reality, and is not inherently destruction, but a fundamental part of creation itself. And the very last form of magic outside of the 4 main ones that we are going to look at is technomancy. Technomancy is a magic that can replicate or affect technology. The magic users who practice technomancy use their bodies as a conduit for technology and casting spells and enchantments with technology. And with that, we've reached the end of this magical journey through the Marvel Universe, and how different magic users can harness the world around them, be it from within, from the earth, from another dimension, or from other beings, other living creatures. So, now let's look at the top 5 things we have learned today in this episode. Number 1, magic in the Marvel Universe comes from multiple sources, and of all of these, all of these sources were tracked by Agamotto as he searched for his mother. Number 2, egocentric magic draws from within one's own spirit and deals a lot with the mind. Number 3, ecocentric magic draws from the earth, and these mages can harness the power of the 4 basic elements. Number 4, exocentric magic draws power from other dimensions and can call on the power of principalities to use said power. And number 5, necromancy is the darkest form of magic, and the chaos god Kuthon, who brought it to the mortal plane, recorded his dark spells in the Darkhold, which would lead to the creation of zombies, werewolves, and vampires. In the next episode, we're going to look at comics that are under the Marvel umbrella, but are not your usual Marvel characters, such as the rock band Kiss or Doctor Who. Tune in next week to find out who else is technically a Marvel character. Thank you for listening, and I hope you are more informed about the magic of the Marvel Universe. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by myself, James Bazinski. Intro music, outro music, and phase intro effect were sourced from freesound.org. You can find us on Instagram at TMPFGL, TikTok at TMPFGL, YouTube at The Marvel Podcast for Gifted Listeners, and any feedback, questions, or suggestions can be emailed to tmpfgl@gmail.com. If you'd like to have more conversations about Marvel with some pretty cool individuals, we do now have a Discord channel, where you can find the link in the episode description. Please like, subscribe, and rate the show wherever you listen. Until next time, gifted listeners, thank you for listening, and Excelsior!